Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar about the battle to protect Plum Island for future generations, and we thank you for taking time at your lunch hour today to learn what is happening and what will be happening this year from Save the Sound and our partners. This is going to last approximately an hour today, a little bit longer than our past webinars. First, I want to introduce ourselves, and my name is Cryder, Land Campaign Manager for Save, based in Connecticut. Louise, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Louise Harrison. I work off of the North Fork of Long Island, and I am the New York Natural Areas Coordinator for Save the Sound.
Both Louise and I now, for several years, have been primarily focused on our effort to protect Plum Island. And I just wanted to say, we've got about 50 people on the call today, and in looking at our audience, it's very diverse. We have people who are learning about Plum Island for the first time. We have people who are on the Preserve Plum Island Coalition, so they know a lot about what's happening. It also looks like we have a few employees from the Department of Homeland Security who may be researchers out at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. So we have a broad group, and we'll try to touch base on as much as we can here today. So Save the Sound leads environmental action in the Long Island Sound region. We fight climate change and help build resilient communities, save endangered lands and islands. We help protect the Sound and restore the rivers that lead to the Sound. And we work throughout Connecticut, Long Island, Westchester, and New York City. So in some of our past presentations, I've talked about our coalition, and we wouldn't be anywhere without this coalition that has worked over the last 10 years. So today we now have 110 coalition organizational members in the coalition, and they work together to affect change and preservation for Plum Island. Within those organizations, we have a steering committee of approximately 15 organizations and individuals, including the Nature Conservancy, Audubon, Group for the East End, we have Sierra Club, and we have Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and a number of individuals who are committed to helping steer and set policy and strategy for the coalition. And Save the Sound is sort of at the core of this coalition. We help coordinate the activities of the coalition steering committee. We lead the strategy for the legal battle, and we also do outreach and communications. Now, in past webinars, I've talked to you a lot about and taken a virtual tour of the entire island, talked to you about the unique wildlife that's there and the habitats. Here are some of the amazing habitats on Plum Island. And we've also talked about the flora and fauna on the island and the historical treasures that are there. And we've talked about the birds and the seals and the creatures that live in and around the waters of Plum Island. But today, we're not going to do that. We're going to get right into our four-step plan, our actions that we've taken recently and today, and what we will be doing in 2020, and also reviewing our year-long effort called the Envision Plum Island process. So we really have 4 steps in our strategy that we'll cover today, and we're focusing on getting help from our legislators in Washington, D.C. for congressional action to block the sale of Plum Island. Some of you may know we're leading a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security and the General Services Administration. We will also talk about today our New York State strategies. What's really key also is reaching out and communicating to the public, building partnerships and getting people talking, and also our year-long effort to envision the future of Plum Island. So first, we need just a little bit of background for those who don't know much about Plum Island and get you oriented. We're coming down to Plum Island, which is located just a little over a mile off the North Fork of Long Island. And here you see it, this unique shaped island, sort of looks like a pork chop. It's 840 acres, about 3 miles long, has 9 miles of beach around it. It is located in the state of New York and within the boundaries of the town of Southold.
No, thank you.
On the island is our nation's Foreign Animal Disease Center, and it has been there since the Second World War doing critical research, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But because it's been there and because of the high security on the island, there's been really little human disturbance, and 80% of the island has been allowed to return to a natural state and, in essence, become a de facto wildlife refuge for many of our region's imperiled species. So, moving on. So I mentioned that the Plum Island Animal Disease Center is located there, and they do critical research protecting our livestock from foreign animal diseases. And there are 400 employees that work there, and they do research, diagnostics, create vaccines, and train veterinarians from around the world on preventing foreign animal diseases from really devastating our livestock as well as those around the world. And the disease they study most is foot and mouth disease. They've created a vaccine for a very virulent form of that disease. But this facility is going to close in the next few years and move to Manhattan, Kansas, into a brand new facility called the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility. And it's not too far off. And once the Plum Island Animal Disease Center moves, because of a law that was passed in 2009, the island, the entirety of the island, is on track to be sold to the highest bidder. The Department of Homeland Security and the General Services Administration, which is our nation's realtor, interpreted the law back in 2009 that the entirety of the island must be sold at auction to the highest bidder, which we don't like. It would be to a developer most likely who would destroy the habitats on this island, harm the wildlife, the water. One particular developer has suggested 2 championship golf courses and a resort community. So we don't see that as the highest and best use of the island. We see something different. So the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, as you see on the screen here, is under construction. And let me take you to a timeline. And they're on schedule for this timeline. So here we go. Hope you can see this on your screen. And I'm going to go to the year 2015. That's when construction began on the new NBAF facility in Kansas. They're expected to complete construction this year. Then they're going through a whole year process of commissioning that facility, getting it ready to be able to take pathogens into their facility, and it's quite a process to get ready. And so by 2022, which is just 2 years away, less than that, they expect to get their approvals for handling disease agents with high risk. This is going to be a new facility with what's called a biosafety level category 4, which I won't get into all the details of that. But then the Animal Disease Center on Plum Island is to close, be decommissioned, and transfer to Kansas by the end of 2023. So this campaign to protect Plum Island is now in its 10th year. Land battles often take a long time and require perseverance, and Save the Sound and our partners are ready for that protracted battle, and we are making gains. So first, let me get into our plan on the federal side of things. Most of the group here, of the 50 or so that are listening, are from the states of New York and Connecticut. And we're working with our legislators regionally and throughout the country to try to get new language passed that would repeal and reverse the language that was passed in 2009 that was interpreted to have the entirety of the island sold. In the House, our champion, Congressman Zeldin on the left, he is in the district where Plum Island is, and Congressman Courtney here in Connecticut have led legislation to repeal the original sale language, as well as a number of other bills that would delay the transition of the Plum Island to Kansas, essentially defunding any work by our nation's realtor to sell the island. Likewise, our senators from New York and Connecticut have also introduced into the Senate language to repeal that original Plum Island language for sale. And up until last year, there has been, unfortunately, no movement in the Senate. There have been gains, and some of the bills have been passed in the House, but unfortunately, none of the bills reached the Senate floor until just recently, in December, during the week of December 20th. Although it wasn't repeal language that we wanted, we did get, for the first time ever, language passed by the House and Senate and signed by President Trump that would defund and prohibit the General Services Administration from doing any activities towards the sale of Plum Island in fiscal year 2020, which is the year we're in. So it may not sound like a huge success, but it really is. It takes a lot of work to get a bill passed in Congress these days. I have a statistic that only 15% of bills that get introduced ever get passed in Washington, D.C. So this bill of getting a reprieve on the sale of Plum Island for 1 year gives us time, and it sends a strong message to the rest of the members in Congress and the region that there's a growing support for protecting Plum Island. But you might ask, well, why haven't we, over the last 7 years of trying to work with Congress, get the repeal language passed? Well, we've had some resistance from some senators, mainly in the Midwest. You know what that sound is? Okay. We've got a little sound. We'll try to solve.
Could everybody on the line please mute yourselves if you're not muted?
Yeah, if you can mute yourself, that would be great. So, are you able to back out so I can see the slides? Are they seeing what you're doing? Oh, okay. So, on the slides now are a number of senators who've had objections and have blocked legislation getting to the floor of the Senate. And I really haven't gone into this in the past, but I decided today, why not? Let's hit our challengers straight on and discuss this. So Senator Johnson is the head of the Senate Department of Homeland Security Committee. He's from Wisconsin. Senator Barrasso from Wyoming is chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator Fisher from Nebraska also, I believe, sits on the Environment and Public Works Committee, where one of the repeal bills has been in but not gotten out of committee. And then Senator Roberts is from Kansas, who really worked hard to get NBAF built in Kansas, and he has had some reservations. Each of them have had different reasons for the resistance, and I'm not going to go into all of those. But there are some common themes amongst this group that are exemplified by a conversation that one of our members on the steering committee had with Senator Fisher's staff a while back. And I think it's a good example of the challenges that we have to overcome. And we're beginning to really get our message through and to do that. But here are some of the challenges. Here's an excerpt from conversation with Senator Fisher's staff a few years back. Senator Fisher's staff said in this interview that a repeal of the existing law is a non-starter, since repeal will result in a loss of federal revenue, which is not something Senator Fisher will support. Then they also stated, the second statement that's important is that they believe that if Senate Bill 1737 passes, which was a repeal bill, and the island is not sold, the island will cost American taxpayers year after year with little or no corresponding benefit, since there is no plan as to how the island will be used. Without an acceptable plan, they anticipate that the island will sit vacant, unused, and deteriorating at the expense of taxpayers. So, those are legitimate concerns, I believe. And let me first address the one about the loss of revenue. And what we learned was that since the early 2000s, many of the senators were unknowing that the value of the island has plummeted. Whoops, not going forward for me. Okay. So back in 2013, the town of Southold moved forward with a plan, and ultimately they did it, and that was rezone the island in the event that it would be sold to a private developer. So you can see on this screen on the left is the Plum Island Research District, which covers about a little under 20% of the island. And on the right is 80% of the island that is called the Conservation District. And so there are stipulations in this zoning that no commercial development can be had on the Conservation District, and that the Research District is to be used for an adaptive reuse of the animal disease research facility. So by putting this zoning in place, very interestingly, back in the early 2000s, there were folks on the island that said in the heyday before the 2008 financial crisis that the island was worth $500 million. Well, with the zoning in place, just this past year, the Nature Conservancy completed a new appraisal, and the island now is worth approximately $17 million, a significant drop. And so one key thing I didn't mention is, and you probably have figured it out already, is that from the proceeds of the island, they were to be used to help build the new NBAF facility in Kansas, which initially was to cost just about $500 million. But today, the price tag is $1.3 billion. So $17 million as a percentage of $1.3 billion is a drop in the bucket, and there's no longer the financial argument from senators that there's going to be a windfall of money from a sale of Plum Island. There's no longer the financial argument. And we've been able, over the years now, to do a number of sit-down sessions in Washington, D.C., do some lobbying, and we believe we've really educated people on this zoning and the impact it's had on its value. So we've made steps that way. The second point that the senators were concerned about, that there's no plan about how the island will be used and that it will be vacant, deteriorating at the expense of taxpayers, that has been a common theme that we've heard. And so starting in 2018, we began a process of bringing stakeholders together to plan a future for the island. And we've called it the Envision Plum Island process, and we just completed that a few months ago and are now in the process of putting together the final plan. And with this plan in place, we will be going to Washington, D.C. this spring, sharing it with the senators, telling them that we do have a plan in place, that if you're able to pass the repeal language, you'll have a plan that won't end up costing the taxpayers lots of money. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Louise, who's been instrumental in coordinating much of the Envision Plan process. So,
Okay.
Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Okay, can everybody hear me? We had a lot of fun doing this. We worked together with the Nature Conservancy. We got a grant to fund it, and part of the funding went to an expert consulting firm called Marstel Day. And this firm has a lot of experience in converting federal properties into conservation status. So with that expertise under their belts and with the energy of the coalition behind us, we went to work and decided to bring in as many stakeholders as possible to help us develop a vision for Plum Island, for all of Plum Island, not simply the conservation district, but also the research district. We started in the fall of 2018 and had a stakeholder session in Riverhead, New York, where we had a wide variety of people coming, from people with expertise in history, in biology, geology, archaeology. We had Native American tribe representation, elected officials. Let's see, we had people from the business community, as well as members of our Preserve Plum Island Coalition Steering Committee. And one of the primary results of that, in addition to good ideas that we heard, were a series of questions that the participants felt we should answer before we continue. So we did do our best to answer those questions, and that led us into a series of individual meetings with people in places of authority on different subjects. So a lot of those were just one-on-one meetings, or people who had a chance to actually set a policy or move something into action. So, for instance, we met with planners at Suffolk County. We met with the vice president of Stony Brook University. We met with the president and CEO of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. We met with the Long Island Association. So we had a series of those meetings. And then while we were doing that, we also prepared for a session that we had in the spring of last year, a whirlwind 1 hour and 20-minute session, which you can see here. It looks in this picture like we're having a prayer session, but those are people actually clapping. But we are praying, of course, for the good outcome. This was at the Brookhaven National Laboratory at the Long Island Natural History Conference. We asked people to sign up ahead of time to participate. About almost 60 people did. We gave them homework ahead of time so we could best use the time in the session that we had, which was during a lunch break. We asked people to look into information that was already available about the conservation value of Plum Island, most of it prepared by the New York Natural Heritage Program. And then we asked them to come together and answer 5 questions in groups arranged by table. And then, as you can see the flip charts in the background, we had reporting out sessions. And we came away with a lot of strong advice, and with these 60 people, quite a bit of consensus. So that was very valuable on how to handle the future of the conservation district and what people who are scientists, naturalists, and educators primarily envisioned for the future of that district. We continued last fall and went to a meeting where we brought some of the same people back in and some new folks, and we talked mostly about the historical and cultural aspects of the island. And now we're pulling together, as Chris mentioned, a report that will put into words our vision. And here you see a representation of our vision laid over a map prepared by the New York Natural Heritage Program a number of years ago. All of the colored spaces you see are different natural communities. And so we use that as a guide, and the very sound advice we got from people at the Natural History Conference, and decided it would be very good to break out the island into sections. We'd like the island to be thought of as a preserve, with research activities also taking place. So for the 80% of the island, we've broken it up into 3 primary districts for conservation. The central area is the area we can foresee some visitation. And the visitation by the general public would be on nature trails, protecting the environment, and in the form of guided tours and some passive recreation. That would include visitation of the Fort Terry historical features there, and hopefully some exhibits on cultural aspects of Plum Island still to be explored. But there are sections of Plum Island we think should be reserved just for researchers and students and for educational purposes. And that would be the far eastern end and the far southern end that you can see in this diagram. Now, the far western end is the research district. Our explorations of future uses for the research district are still underway. And as you can also see, there's the Plum Island Lighthouse is now in that district as far as the zoning goes, the town of Southold zoning. We've been in discussions with Southold to give the Plum Island Light a different zone and call that a conservation zone as well, and develop some kind of easements so that people can get to the main recreation and nature trail area from the light if people want to, even if the research district becomes a place for some other enterprise that isn't immediately related to conservation. We would like to see some kind of cross easements available. You'll notice that there's a cutout in the lower left portion of this diagram in the southwestern corner of the island along the shore there. That's the harbor where the Plum Island Ferry comes and goes. And you'll see in the photo in the upper left of the diagram another parcel. That parcel is in Orient Point, and it's where the Plum Island Ferry brings workers and scientists to and from Plum Island every day. That parcel is also for sale as part of the property that the federal government wants to sell. And they're also selling 3 ferries. So we'd like to see this kind of travel back and forth to bring people to Plum Island, but we also see it as necessary for the redevelopment of the research district. And we are finding that this is a difficult place to envision a future use. What has bubbled up to the top of our explorations is that it would be best if we could have some kind of an enterprise there that actually requires an island, because of course transportation back and forth and maintaining a site offshore can be very expensive. So some kind of research that requires an island would be appropriate. That might be something that needs to be kept away from the general public, or that benefits from being on an island, for instance, perhaps marine research, some sort of consortium like that. Now, we've been going around and continuing our discussions about the research district, and just yesterday, Save the Sound and the Nature Conservancy, including myself and Leah Schmaltz from Save the Sound, Greg Jacob and Marion Lindbergh from the Nature Conservancy went to Albany, and we met with the Deputy Secretary for Economic Development, the first Assistant Deputy Secretary for Energy and Environment, and the Deputy Secretary for Education. And we had an introductory session to discuss the future of this facility in the research district. We think we've reached a point where we need some help in developing ideas. Now, why do we care so much about the research district getting a new use? Lots of reasons. And I would say, I don't know which is the top reason, but a very important reason is maintaining good quality jobs for people who live on the North Fork and some who live in Shelter Island. That's very important for that region. Another is because if you have a good reason to keep ferries coming and going, you have an opportunity to bring in researchers and the general public to explore and protect the remaining areas of Plum Island. And these two things can work together. We have discovered just how prescient the town of Southold was in selection of these zoned districts, and we're working closely with them to come up with some minor alterations that they may want to make in the future based on the vision that we've come out with. I want to mention one more thing before we go along, and that is we have support from the Long Island Association, which is Long Island's premier business organization. And they just voted last month for in their 2020 priorities, which you can see on their website if you wish. They have selected as one of their priorities the extension of a research zone east from Brookhaven National Lab to include Plum Island. Currently, their research corridor goes from Manhattan to Brookhaven National Lab and includes Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, Stony Brook University, the Tata Institute, the Genome Institute, and now they're looking at Plum Island as being part of that and hoping that it will draw in ideas for the island because it's an opportunity zone for good quality research. So we're pretty excited about that, and we hope to be working with them more closely. Do we have the next slide?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce it, Louise, just real quickly.
Okay.
And so part of our 4-step plan includes New York State strategies. And we believe that New York State, and particularly Governor Cuomo, as you see in this picture, has powers to defend Plum Island from irresponsible private development. And we also believe that the state of New York and Governor Cuomo are best suited to be the champion for conserving Plum Island as well as leading the reuse of the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. So a big part of the coalition's work and our partners has been to meet over the last 5 years with many groups and state agencies, as well as the governor's chamber, over the last 5 years to bring them up to speed on Plum Island, why it's important to protect and reuse Plum Island, and get their support. Also, of course, the Plum Island, Preserve Plum Island Coalition and the public have been communicating with these agencies and directly with Governor Cuomo through communications too. So what I thought, Louise, is if you could just go a little bit more into detail on what we've done and where we're headed with New York State and Governor Cuomo.
Sure. We've been building up. I'm getting an echo. Okay, I think it went away. We've been building up from the agencies on, understanding that once we were talking to people close to the governor, we'd want them to be well-versed in the subject matter. So we've been starting lower down into the agencies. And we began with Long Island State Parks and met with many people there to introduce them to Plum Island as a priority for us. We went on to meet with the Department of State, in which New York's coastal program is embedded, and talked about how should Plum Island get to the point where it is being set up for a sale. I mean, they've been planning it and they've been working on it, but if it gets to the point where they are ready to transfer Plum Island to another owner, the federal government will need to tell the state about their plans in doing so, because it will affect our coastal zone. And at that point, New York's coastal zone management program will go into effect, and New York State has the ability to say no to a transfer that does not meet with its coastal policies. And in 2015, we put together a white paper that explained why we think New York can say no to a sale like this. And we've been keeping our friends and colleagues at the Department of State informed, and they have a high interest in this now. We're very grateful for their support. We've also been meeting regularly with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, particularly because they are overseeing the cleanup of Plum Island. And also our primary liaison is the regional director, Carrie Meek Gallagher, from Long Island, and she's another conduit for us in our discussions with New York State. So those have been very helpful discussions. It was in the fall of 2018 when we had our workshop, our first workshop. We were very happy to see a member of the governor's executive chamber come. And he attended, took notes, participated, and decided to open the door to the executive chamber for us because of this issue. And he did, and his name is Evan Preminger, and he's been very helpful in setting up meetings for us with the governor's people in Albany. And they are the people who set policy and basically have a say over what the agencies do. Those meetings have resulted in getting some of the highest level people in the agencies in a conversation with us. And in August, we got the attention of the new Parks Commissioner, Eric Kulisade, and his staff, and they've been very interested. I'm very hopeful that they will continue their interest and perhaps push for Plum Island to be part of the New York State Park system. The Office of Attorney General has been involved because of an offer to intervene in our lawsuit if the time comes where we think we need that. And so that's in our back pocket. We're very happy about that. And as I mentioned earlier, we met yesterday with people in the executive chamber regarding economic development and potential educational uses for Plum Island. If we can discover some kind of a future use for the research district that involves health or education, it's possible that Plum Island, or at least that portion of it, could be transferred to New York for free. And same thing with the conservation district. If a future use related to conservation can be proven to the federal government that New York is willing and able to carry out conservation measures, they may receive that portion of the island for free as well, under a kind of a conveyance called a public benefit conveyance. These are the kinds of things we've learned from our consultant that have been very helpful to us, and we're grateful for that, because now we're able to show New York a way to make it happen. And we're sort of becoming the bridge between them and the federal agencies that are trying to sell Plum Island, and we're hoping to continue those conversations. Chris, if I left anything out, please fill in.
I think you've covered it there, Louise, and thanks for that. And so moving on, I'll just briefly mention our lawsuit that we've mentioned a couple times today. Back in 2016, Save the Sound, along with other partners, launched a federal lawsuit with the attempt to block the sale of the entirety of Plum Island at an auction. That lawsuit right now has not yet been heard. It is stayed for the moment while the federal government pursues something that's called a supplemental environmental impact statement. And I won't go into that in depth, but they did an original one that was published in 2013, their final environmental impact statement, and without going into detail, it was horrific, poorly done. And because of our lawsuit, it pushed them really to do what's called a supplemental environmental impact statement, which they plan to address the deficiencies in the first one. We'll see. But our lawsuit is still there, provides leverage for the coalition, and we'll keep you up to date as it progresses. And then the last part involves all of you on this phone call. And it's part of our outreach and education effort and communication effort. Louise and I have done, I think it's now over 130 presentations to groups throughout the New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island area. And coming from those presentations, we have over 6,000 activists. Petitions have been signed. We've had events. This was a Plum Island plunge that was done on a 5-degree day. Other events, you can see kayakers here that were out on Long Island that are involved in saving Plum Island. And then, though, as you are listening to us through the technology of computers or smartphones, probably our largest action to date has been those who are interested in protecting Plum Island, like yourselves, communicating with our legislators as well as Governor Cuomo. I like to tell, I guess my proudest moment was last fall when we were asking people to send letters to various chairs of committees that control our nation's budget, and the language that eventually got passed. So many emails were sent to the staff of certain legislators that we were told we have to stop. That's a beautiful thing to hear, that all of our activists created something that was so impactful that staff members who were receiving these emails couldn't do their regular business. And it sent a good message. And we were told that most of the reason why we were successful in at least getting the defunding bill, the delay bill, or the reprieve bill of the sale of Plum Island was due to legislators' constituents speaking up. And so we will continue our efforts this year with outreach and public education and activities to persuade our federal government to repeal the original law. And so, just in summary, I guess we want to probably go back to a picture. Just in summary, again, in Congress, this is a very important year. This whole entire year of 2020 and moving into 2021 is very important. As you saw, our timeline is shrinking, and I like to say we're now in the red zone. We're only 3 years out to a potential move of Plum Island Animal Disease Center to Kansas and the sale of the island, so we have a lot of work to do left. But I think there's a new intensity. We are getting in Congress, we are having conversations on both sides of the aisle, and people are asking and talking about their challenges to overcome. How can we get this done? Likewise, in the state of New York, the conversations that we've had with them, the tone of the conversations has changed, and they're asking a lot more detailed questions on how can we get this done. They're looking forward to the final publication of the Envision Plum Island plan, which should be coming out within the next month or two. And please look forward to community presentations where you'll be invited to hear the results, the full results of that plan. We'll also, after this webinar, send you out an email to give you some suggestions on how you can become a part of the effort and give you links to where you can get more information. So with that, we've got approximately 15 minutes left. We'll move to any questions that you have.
Here, this is Louise. I just want to add one more thing, which is if you have a pen, please write down preserveplumisland.org and consider that your website for staying up to date and activism. Currently, we have buttons on the website you can press that will open up a letter you can send to Governor Cuomo. And we sometimes change these letters depending on the current need. But you should get updates on it, and you should find some things that will point you as well to our Facebook page, which is the Preserve Plum Island Facebook page, where we also bring people up to date. So those are two ways you can stay informed.
Okay. Thank you, Chris and Louise. A reminder for everyone, if you do have questions for Chris and Louise, please type them into the chat area. We do have one question from Penny Newberry. Thank you, Penny. This is a great question. Penny's wondering, how strong is Southold's hold on its zoning regulations? Your main bit of ammo seems to involve the conservation zoning on 80% of the island. If the federal government can barrel through with the sale, what's to stop them from influencing a change in the zoning regs?
Louise, you want to take that on?
Sure, Ken. First of all, there's no zoning that's currently applicable on the island while it is in federal ownership. The zoning is going to take effect if and when, and hopefully it won't, but if and when the island should go into private hands. And at that point, the town of Southold has the authority to dictate what kinds of activities should take place on the island because they have zoning power. Now, if a person or an entity that were private were to purchase all or part of Plum Island and did not like the town of Southold's zoning regulation, they might challenge it. The town wants to defend it. Most courts will uphold the zoning. But the real danger, as we all are starting to see, is that litigation over zoning was not out in the favor of the town, and expensive for a municipality. And so there is a concern that someone might exhaust the resources of the town by continuing to keep them in litigation over zoning. So we are doing our best to put Plum Island back into the regular process for disposition of federal properties, which is codified and which all agencies follow if they have a piece of property they don't want anymore, except in this case where Congress decided to go around that process. But if they go through the regular process, and this is part of what we're trying to push for, and if other agencies at the federal level don't want Plum Island, the state would be offered Plum Island. And so we're hoping for that outcome, and we're pushing for that outcome. And we're using the town's zoning as a guide for what the town would like to have in its midst, respecting the need for jobs. And we're also finding that because we're doing this good planning work, the town is now responsive back to us and is saying, you know, we may adjust our zoning a little bit. We might have to tweak it here and there because you're going through this Envision Plum Island project and you're doing a good job and we like what we're seeing, and you've engaged many more people than we ever could have in our planning department. So let's work together on this going forward. So thank you for that good question. And if you have a further question on it, I'd be happy to answer it.
Okay, and there's also a point here from Penny. I'll put this out into the world. We'll also pass this along to more members of our team, that you'd like to see more events that people in Connecticut can participate in, possibly around the Noank, Mystic, New London area. So that is a point well taken and noted. Thank you for that as well, Penny. Okay. Unless there's other questions. Oh, here's a question from Chris. What is the best strategy for pressuring senators objecting to the Repeal Act?
Some of the strategies that we've employed, what it takes is direct education to overcome some of their challenges that they brought forth, which I discussed earlier in the presentation. And so I talked about, for example, overcoming the thought that there is potentially windfall profits by selling the island, which is not true. What it takes is education of these senators that are throughout the country. So it's a regional issue, but it's actually, in order to get it done, it takes national work. And it takes more effort on our team from the Preserve Plum Island Coalition to educate the subcommittees, the staffs, as well as the senators. And I should say too that it's not a done deal in the House either. There's politics in the House as well that we have to do. So getting communication, on which you can do, Chris and others, that you wish to see Plum Island preserved to your senators. And we did have an action alert not too long ago to ask people to send emails to the staffs of certain senators that have had objections. We'll be doing that most likely again coming up at the appropriate time this year as legislation is dealt with in Congress. So education, spending more lobbying time down in DC, which we plan to do, communication from the public to senators and senators outside the region are all really what we have to do. And try to overcome some of the objections that they have about their fear that there's no plan in place for the future of Plum Island. And as we talked, we've created an envision plan. The report will be out soon, and we plan to do a briefing of that down in Washington, D.C., and hitting all of the various subcommittees and staff. So I went on long there, but hopefully I answered your question, Chris.
Part of the education process as well, which may appeal to some senators, is to point out that although we in this region really care about Plum Island a lot, Plum Island has national significance. It has federal trust species that use it. It has a lighthouse that's in the National Register of Historic Places. It has Fort Terry, which has been there for 3 wars and was a training ground for many, many troops over the years. And it has the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, which is nationally recognized in the forefront of research, biomedical and veterinary research, and has helped save livestock all around the world. So it also lies in the middle of 2 national estuaries where the Long Island Sound lets out and where the Peconic Estuary lets out, and those are both estuaries of national significance recognized by the federal government. So it has a lot going for it on the federal level, and if your senators care and are patriotic about those kinds of things, those are some arguments you can use.
Yeah, I'll just, this is Kurt Johnson, president of Save the Sound. I'll just add another thought. The current bill that we're trying to fight, which ordered the sale of Plum Island, I think there's a very strong argument that it's federal overreach. And federal overreach resonates particularly with Western senators. This is the federal government telling us we cannot conserve a piece of land. And it's important to remind those Western senators that we're in an entirely different situation than they are, where they might have 70 or 80% of their state in federal ownership. We have almost none of our state in federal ownership, and almost all of our land on Long Island is already developed. We're just in an entirely different world. So to have a federal overreach demanding that this land be sold is just that. Let's go back to the normal federal process. Let the normal process that allows towns and local authorities to have the right to protect the land and put it into public use if they choose, allow that to happen. Let the locals have a voice. That kind of message does resonate with a lot of our Republican friends.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. That's about our time. And you can look for this later today. This will be up on YouTube, and we'll be sending links around and I believe an email communication as well. So thanks again for joining, and let's get out there and save Plum Island.
Thanks.
Thanks.